I want to be clear from the start that I am not someone who believes in supernatural things easily. I hike a lot. I plan routes carefully. I carry paper maps, even when I have GPS, and I keep a written log of my trips. This happened in late September of 2019 in a national forest in the Pacific Northwest. I am not naming the forest because a ranger later asked me not to, and after everything that followed, I agreed. The plan was simple. A 4-day solo hike on established trails I had already done parts of before. Nothing remote, nothing extreme. The weather forecast was stable, and the permit process was routine. I printed the official trail map from the Forest Service website the night before I left and highlighted my route. I also downloaded the same map to my phone and my GPS unit. Everything matched. On the first day, I parked at a small trailhead with space for about 8 cars. There were 3 vehicles already there. 2 belonged to a couple I spoke to briefly, and the third looked like it had been there for a while. Dust on the windows, flat-looking tires. I remember thinking it was odd, but not alarming. The first several hours went exactly as expected. Clear trail, normal elevation changes, nothing out of the ordinary. Around early afternoon, I reached a marked junction. The signpost showed my trail to the left, exactly as on the map. What it also showed was a narrow trail branching right with a wooden marker that simply said Creek Trail. No mileage, no destination. That caught my attention. On both my paper map and GPS, there was no creek trail listed at that junction. I assumed it was either an unmaintained spur or a renamed route that hadn't been updated yet. I stood there for a while, checking coordinates. My GPS showed only the main trail. The spur did not register. I stayed on my planned route that day and made camp near a small lake. Nothing strange happened that night. I slept fine. The second day is where things changed. About 6 miles in, I came to another junction. This time, the creek trail appeared again, intersecting my route at a different angle. Same kind of wooden marker. Same lack of information. The trail itself looked used. Packed dirt, trimmed brush, no obvious signs of neglect. I checked my maps again. Still nothing. I even turned off my GPS and restarted it. No change. What bothered me wasn't just that the trail wasn't on the map. It was that it had now intersected my route twice, miles apart, without any indication of where it came from or where it went. Trails don't usually do that without being documented. I decided to follow it briefly, telling myself I would only go a quarter mile and then turn back. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not silent, but muted. The usual background sounds of wind and distant water felt dampened. I kept walking, checking my watch. After 10 minutes, my GPS showed I had barely moved. The distance reading did not match the time or effort. At around 15 minutes, I saw a man coming toward me. He was dressed like a hiker. Normal gear, backpack, boots, weather jacket, middle-aged. He nodded when he saw me and asked where I was headed. I told him I was just checking the trail and would be turning back soon. He looked relieved and said that was probably for the best. I asked him where the trail led. He paused longer than expected and said, "It loops back eventually." That answer didn't make sense, but before I could press him, he continued walking past me in the direction I had come from. I watched him go. I did not hear his footsteps fade the way they should have. I turned back shortly after and returned to the main trail. When I reached the junction again, the creek trail sign was still there, but the trail and trance itself looked slightly different. Narrower, less defined. That night, I camped farther along my route. I wrote everything down in my log, including the encounter. I assumed fatigue was messing with my perception. On the third day, I met a group of 3 hikers at a water source. They were friendly, relaxed, and seemed experienced. We talked about routes, conditions, and campsites. When I mentioned the creek trail, all three of them exchanged looks. One of them asked me where I had seen it. I told them. They told me they had been on that same section the day before and did not see any such trail. No sign, no junction. I showed them my log entry. They laughed it off gently, suggesting I might have mistaken a game trail or an old service route. Still, I could tell the conversation made them uneasy. Later that afternoon, the creek trail appeared again. This time, I did not choose to follow it. I walked past it without stopping. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, even, not trying to catch up. I stepped off the trail to let whoever it was pass. No one did. I waited. The footsteps stopped. When I turned around, there was no one there. That night, I dreamed of walking the same stretch of trail over and over, always arriving at the same junction, always seeing the same sign. On the fourth morning, my GPS showed something that finally pushed me into real concern. According to the device, I was almost 12 miles from where I should have been, despite following the route precisely. My elevation readings were also wrong. I decided to abort the trip and head back to the trailhead. On the way back, I passed the creek trail junction one last time. The sign was gone. The trail itself remained. I did not follow it. When I reached the trailhead, only one vehicle was there, the dusty one I had noticed on the first day. As I drove out, I passed a ranger truck heading in. I stopped and told the ranger about the missing trail, the sign, and the GPS issues. He listened carefully without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me to show him my map. I did. He looked at it, nodded, and said there had never been a creek trail in that forest. When I asked him about the abandoned car, he said it had been reported missing 6 years earlier. The owner had gone hiking alone. Before I left, he told me something quietly. Some trails don't stay where we put them, he said, and some people don't know when to stop walking. I have gone back and forth for years about whether to write this down in one place. I am doing it now because time has not made it easier to explain away, and because I still hike, but not the way I used to. This happened in the summer of 2017, during a solo backcountry loop in the Rocky Mountains, on a trail system that was remote but established and legal. I had permits, I checked in with rangers, and I followed my itinerary exactly as filed. The route was a 4-day loop with designated campsites spread far enough apart to keep traffic low. I chose it specifically because it was quiet. I had hiked alone many times before, and nothing about this trip felt risky when I planned it. I was in good shape, carried enough food, and the weather window looked stable. The first day was uneventful. I parked at the trailhead mid-morning and started hiking before noon. I passed 2-day hikers within the first hour, and no one else after that. The trail was clear, well-marked, and dry. By late afternoon, I reached my first campsite, set up my tent, cooked dinner, and turned in early. I slept through the night without interruption. The second day started normally. I broke camp, packed up, and got back on the trail just after sunrise. About an hour in, I noticed a man ahead of me on the trail. At first, there was nothing strange about him. He was walking at a steady pace, wearing standard hiking gear, backpack, boots, hat, neutral colors. He was far enough ahead that I couldn't make out details, but close enough that I could tell he was alone. I did what hikers usually do in that situation. I slowed down slightly to maintain distance. I wasn't in a hurry, and I didn't feel the need to pass him. Over the next 2 hours, the distance between us stayed almost exactly the same. That was the first thing that struck me as odd. Normally, someone speeds up, slows down, stops for water, or steps off the trail. None of that happened. He never adjusted his pace. He never stopped. He never turned around. The spacing between us stayed consistent in a way that felt mechanical. Around midday, the trail narrowed and visibility increased. I could see him more clearly now. He was taller than average, lean, and carried his pack higher than most people do. I noticed that his arms barely moved when he walked. At a junction, he turned left. That was my planned route as well. I stopped at the junction to check my map and GPS, deliberately taking my time. I expected him to disappear around the bend. When I resumed hiking, he was still there, the same distance ahead. That afternoon, I passed my second campsite, but kept going toward the third, planning to shorten the last day. I assumed the man would stop somewhere along the way. He did not. When I finally stopped for the day, I watched the trail carefully, expecting him to continue past me. He never appeared. I told myself he had stopped somewhere out of sight. That night, I heard footsteps outside my tent. They were slow and deliberate, not heavy, not rushed, just steady steps on dirt and gravel. I stayed still, listening. The footsteps circled my campsite once and then stopped. I waited a long time before unzipping the tent. There was no one there. The third day is when the situation stopped feeling ambiguous. I started early, unsettled, but still trying to rationalize everything. About 40 minutes into the hike, I saw him again. This time, he was behind me, far enough back that I couldn't hear him, but close enough that I could see him whenever the trail curved. His pace matched mine exactly. When I slowed, he slowed. When I stopped briefly to adjust my pack, he stopped too. I stepped off the trail to let him pass. He did not. He stood still, watching me from several yards away. His face was calm, not hostile, not friendly, just blank. After about a minute, he turned and walked in the opposite direction. I waited until he disappeared before continuing. Less than an hour later, he was ahead of me again. At this point, I was actively frightened, not panicked, but alert in a way that drained my energy. I started checking my GPS more often. I took photos of landmarks. I wanted proof that I was where I thought I was. That afternoon, I reached a long ridge section with clear views. There was nowhere to hide. I could see the trail stretching far ahead. He was there, standing still in the middle of it. When I approached, he stepped off the trail without speaking and stood motionless as I passed. I nodded reflexively. He did not respond. I noticed then that his pack looked almost empty. It sat flat against his back, with no visible gear attached. That night, I did not sleep. The footsteps returned, closer this time. They stopped just outside my tent and stayed there for a long time. I could hear breathing, but it did not sound labored or human in the way I expected. It was slow and controlled. At some point near dawn, it stopped. On the fourth morning, I broke camp quickly and decided to exit the loop early using a cut-off trail. According to my map, it would take most of the day, but keep me moving. Within an hour, I saw him again. He was standing off-trail, watching me. I shouted at him then, asked what he wanted, asked why he was following me. He did not respond. He stepped backward into the trees. I never saw him again. When I reached the ranger station that evening, I reported the encounter. I described the man in detail. The ranger listened carefully and then asked me a question that still bothers me. "How many days did you say you saw him?" When I answered, he nodded and said they had received similar reports over the years. He told me something else before I left. No one ever sees him leave the trail. I am writing this as carefully as I can because the details matter, and because every time I have tried to talk about it out loud, people focus on the wrong parts. This is not about hearing voices in my head. This is not about stress or dehydration. Other people heard it too. That is the part that still keeps me from sleeping well when I camp alone. This happened in the fall of 2020 during a multi-day hike in the desert Southwest, in a region managed jointly by federal land agencies. I am intentionally not naming the exact location, but it was a popular long-distance trail segment that runs through open desert, low canyons, and exposed plateaus. The terrain was dry, quiet, and deceptively simple, which is why what happened there felt so wrong. I was not alone when the trip started. 3 of us planned the hike together months in advance. All of us had experience in desert hiking and understood the risks. We had permits, water caches, satellite communication, and a clear exit plan. The route was broken into 5 days, with bailout points marked at regular intervals. The first day was normal. Hot, slow, predictable. We covered less ground than expected, but stayed within our plan. That night, we camped near a shallow wash. We talked, ate, and slept without incident. On the second day, one of the group members twisted his ankle badly enough that continuing was not smart. We activated our contingency plan. He used a satellite communicator to check in, and the 2 of us helped him reach a trail junction where he could be picked up the next morning. That left just me and the other hiker, a man I had known casually through hiking groups. By the 3rd day, it was only me. The other hiker decided to exit early, as well due to an equipment issue. We parted ways and marked junction late in the morning. I watched him walk away until he disappeared behind a rock outcrop. I was alone from that point on. The desert changes when you are the only one in it. Not dramatically, subtly. Sounds travel farther. Silence stretches longer. You become more aware of your own movements and breathing. It was sometime in the early afternoon when I first heard my voice. I was hiking through a wide, shallow canyon with low walls on either side. The trail was obvious, the footing good. I was not tired or dehydrated. I stopped to drink water, and as I tightened the cap on my bottle, I heard someone say my name. It came from behind me. I turned immediately, expecting to see the other hiker. The canyon behind me was empty. The voice sounded exactly like mine. Same tone, same cadence. It even used the same shortened version of my name that only close friends use. It said it once, clearly, and then stopped. I stood there for a long time, listening. Nothing else followed. I told myself it was an echo. The canyon walls were low, but echoes can do strange things. I resumed hiking. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it said a full sentence. It said, "I'll catch up in a minute." Those were words I had said earlier that day when we were separating at the junction. I stopped walking. The voice came from off the trail, to my left, somewhere higher up the canyon wall. I climbed a short distance to get a better view. There was nothing there. No footprints. No movement. I used my satellite communicator to send a brief check-in message to the friend who had exited earlier, just to ground myself. He replied quickly. Everything normal. The rest of that day passed without incident, but I did not stop thinking about the voice. That night, I camped on an exposed plateau. The wind picked up after sunset, and I slept lightly. On the 4th day, the voice returned. It happened in the morning, while I was hiking along a ridgeline. This time, it came from ahead of me. It said, "This way is faster." I froze. The trail ahead split around a rock formation and rejoined farther on. I knew that because I had studied the map. There was no faster way. The voice used my tone again, but it was slightly off, like someone repeating something they had heard without fully understanding it. I responded without thinking. I said no. There was a pause. Then my voice said, "Okay." That was the moment I felt real fear. Later that day, I encountered two other hikers moving in the opposite direction. We exchanged brief conversation about water sources and trail conditions. As we were parting ways, one of them asked me something that made my stomach drop. "Who were you talking to earlier?" I asked what he meant. He said he had heard someone calling out from the canyon below, using my voice, saying things that didn't make sense. He assumed I was hiking with a partner. I did not correct him. That night, I did not camp where I had planned. I pushed farther, wanting to reach a designated site near a ranger-maintained water cache. I felt safer knowing others passed through the area regularly. After dark, while I was setting up my shelter, I heard my voice again. This time it was close. It said, "I can see you." I grabbed my headlamp and scanned the area. Nothing. The voice repeated the sentence, but the timing was wrong. The pauses were too long. The emphasis was incorrect. I did not respond. On the 5th day, I reached the final stretch of the hike. The voice did not return until late afternoon, when I was within a few miles of the exit trailhead. It said, "You can stop now." I did not stop. When I reached the trailhead, there were other people there. Families, day hikers. I stayed close to them until my ride arrived. I reported the incident to a ranger later that evening. I explained everything. The ranger listened, then asked me to describe exactly what the voice said. When I finished, he told me something quietly. "You're not the first person to hear themselves out there," he said, "and you're not the first one to answer." I still hike. I do not hike alone in the desert anymore.